Let us know when we can wait to Jen.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay, so Jen.
Yeah, no, I'm intrigued.
Go into your second year.
Okay, can you guys
Final, yeah.
Can you guys like just introduce yourselves as an example?
Hi, I'm Olivia.
Sup.
Yes, she answered.
I'm PG.
Where is the chat?
Notorious NVG here. Reporting from campus.
Hard-hitting news.
Where's the chat?
Nicole,
And Chris just like he started calling me Notorious NVG.
Oh, it's
And it's my initials.
Her initials.
Oh.
Notorious NVG.
Then you just call me Notorious.
That's hilarious.
Oh.
Jen just said Nicole's jokes are bad.
So she can hear.
Jen, I love you.
Couldn't we just call you Biggie?
Yeah, that too.
Biggie.
Everyone's phone is like off. I will. That's there. All of
I don't
them.
want your phone ruining.
That's there.
Is
It's
that a
true.
word?
She's really good at it.
Everything will be ruined.
Yeah.
Do we have an idea of who will be how many people will be
I
watching?
think there's like
We got 3,000 live.
no, it's not a lot live.
Yeah, I would assume so.
Because a lot of them like a lot of people were things too.
I mean, how do they not know about me?
But I think there was like 7 like percent of them live that we had flash.
Totally, yeah.
So
Can that be heard? Or in and out?
Yes.
Oh yes.
Right, because you need to
It's really sick.
make a
right?
phone call, right?
you can go in the room, one of the rooms.
Actually,
Make
if
a phone
you
call.
use the back door and just keep it propped open a little bit so that it's closed, there's no alarm that will go off. So if you go through the kitchen and through the back,
Just don't lock
don't
yourself
so much
out.
if you trip on anything, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh no. I wouldn't. I would not be my first. I don't know.
Why is that your first thought?
I'm HR.
Well, I never signed a waiver.
We gotta keep
Yeah.
the premiums down.
There's been no waiver in here.
That's good. We recorded today. You will see.
I never signed a waiver. I just said I wasn't my first thought.
Was it a good idea to bring you?
If anything,
Question
I
mark.
was just telling you that.
That's what Nicole thinks about me.
I know. Next time I'm bringing Jen.
What
I
is
just
it?
spent 10 minutes guessing you. I think this is like
Not really, it was like a minute.
It felt so much longer.
It's gonna be
I'm
great.
gonna log in on my phone and check it.
No,
When
we
you
just-
got it. It's gonna. Yes, please. Sorry, I'm just.
One day I'm catching on to what you say in Somali.
What the data means you will succeed, or you will do well.
See, I knew that.
Okay.
Calm down.
Not literally the devil. It sounds like you called her the devil. It's ward off the devil. Ward off the devil is basically means like
Oh,
you're.
I am the devil.
You speak Arabic? No, I speak Turkish, but like some words like shaitan and every religious
Oh, I know the
stuff
root
are.
ones. Yeah,
Oh,
I
no,
know
it's Taiwan.
the shoe small.
Your path.
No, that's
What?
What's it called?
No, she's one is fat.
No, that's Turkish.
Yeah. But it's in Arabic.
I don't know. We don't. Nobody knows.
It's just live all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're
Well,
fat.
It's okay.
I'm still triggered.
She's
right
probably sitting there just laughing.
Hi, Jen. I don't know if she heard you.
I hope we're entertaining you, Jen.
now. I said stop class.
Did she say the volume's okay?
Do you want to tell us who Jen is?
Jen's our HQ admin.
She's a dietitian. I told you
Yeah.
Yes.
She is the overseer of all.
You told me.
We all wouldn't be able to function
that.
without Jen.
Short of the time.
Right,
I
Jen?
don't see the chat. Okay, I have 7 minutes to figure this out.
Can you guys, everybody chill? Everybody chill?
Chill.
Okay. I'm joining the meeting.
Okay, do I need to accept you?
What's the meeting ID?
No, there's no. Oh, it's because you did the link. It would have shown up.
We gotta download the app first.
Well, download the app with the link.
Well, I'm doing that right now, Sarah.
Oh my god, why is that?
Sounds like our workplace.
We all love each other a lot.
HR is pretty combative.
I know, not
Serious. I'm gonna bring that up with management.
I'd like to bring it up with HR.
Raise my
Make sure you're being bad at it.
Wait, are you not muted? Oh no,
You're supposed to
Hello.
remain neutral at all
Yeah,
times.
this is an unsafe environment. Yeah.
Not
I am,
creating
everybody shut up.
Okay, that's fine.
I can hear you guys.
Oh, actually, can you guys talk?
Hello.
You want us to talk?
Hello. There you go.
Is mine okay?
It's
And
me.
Nicole needs to be louder.
Nicole, you need to be
I
louder.
need to be louder, okay?
I've never had an issue with volume. You're gonna have to keep up.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm talking too
Oh,
loud.
I can see me, I can see Jen, and I can see that.
I have issues with volume in that I'm always too quiet.
Oh,
Oh,
Georgie.
Georgie, and I'm always loud in my shoes.
Hola, Jorge.
I know. Does the poster look okay?
I mean, it doesn't look lopsided from here.
No, can you see this as Planned Parenthood?
Yes.
Because
For some reason here it's bad quality, but when we look at the good camera, it's good quality.
Okay, that's good.
It looks kind of
Just
weird.
as long as you can actually see the logo, because I would have brought it for no reason.
Oh, no, obviously.
Sarah's gonna be like, what?
Okay, so edit this meeting.
Sarah would laugh so hard.
Yeah, she would. No, she'd be really mad.
I won't let me turn it on.
Sarah's never really bad.
No. She just tells me to get out.
Sometimes she's
bro.
disappointed in worse.
Yeah.
That's worse for my people who love
Because,
you.
like, you can't defend yourself.
No.
I hate this.
I feel bad that she's so sick. You're supposed to meet today, weren't you?
Yeah.
She blames
All
her
good.
Her
Just feel
husband,
better.
apparently.
So, do you want me to just talk first?
Not a big deal.
Yeah, but then it's not anonymous.
Because anonymously.
I just feel like she gets sick really often.
She works a lot.
I mean, if you're an ED, chances are.
What else has been a rough?
Yeah, yeah.
Where's my chat?
I know. It was there the last time I talked
I'm
about
tired
the
of
call.
thinking in English.
I know how you
Strap
feel.
thinks about, yeah, I was gonna say strap.
Trap started dreaming in English.
I did.
Ooh.
Wait, what did you say?
Strap can relate. Like what? French is your first, or would Turkish be your first language?
French and Turkish-ish.
English is the
Both
third
of them.
thing.
I just thought I would.
Yeah,
2
like-
weeks ago?
No, a week ago.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm really good teacher.
Yeah.
Because it's
Do
all I
you
know.
dream in English?
I did not, but now, like recently, a few years ago, yeah.
That's
it's
crazy.
basically
Never
like-
thought
And when you
about that.
think,
It's
is it
English
depending on
now.
what you're thinking about?
No, it's mostly English now.
What if you're
Oh.
mad? What if you're talking to an insurance adjuster?
See, when I'm angry, or I'm feeling very strong emotion, I can only speak Arabic. And also when I see babies, I like.
Oh,
I forget how to.
yeah.
I suddenly sound like an old. I was like, oh, how do you tell me?
Did you dream in English?
It depends on what I'm dreaming about. So I dreamt about my grandfather a couple weeks ago, and
Pay no attention. Pay no attention.
So.
How's that? It's all the way up.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Attention. 3 minutes. Okay, so we need to figure out the chat thing. It's an hour.
Oh, man.
So. We'll just leave it until next.
Look at me.
You look like
Me?
It's getting great.
Private chat.
Don't pay attention to the hecklers.
Well, I'm not a heckler. I'm trying to make sure she doesn't get in her own head, but she does.
Once she starts,
I'm okay.
Are you?
you're
Probably.
the
I
expert.
specifically told
It's
you.
fine.
Yeah, but I feel like those high pressure. Is anyone ever an expert?
You're the subject matter.
True.
The SparkU is
Okay,
so
so,
like I'll just laugh at myself for a minute.
Yeah, that's true.
obviously, some people can't see the chat. So.
What? What are you saying about me?
She could be eating ice cream.
Oh,
But
you
she
said you
chose to
canceled
be
your
here.
plans.
There's a
Yeah.
there's a good ice cream place
That
called.
was a choice.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was a choice.
Don't let her go.
No, she
There's-
asked me, and I know. Ice cream at 5:30.
No, and I said I need to be there for 6:30. They just met me.
Yeah, but like. No, they're all.
Oh.
They can't hear all of this.
Everything.
So
Okay.
Jen can
Don't
go over.
deflect me on
Yes.
Olivia.
Yeah.
Everyone knows
Yeah,
that
but
you're catching
fucking
the party, you just got back from vacation, that's an hour
Are we
and a half
recording it?
conversation.
Yes, we have been recording.
It's like the most
Oh,
annoying
no,
conversation.
this is
Oh,
like
it's
big
annoying,
deal.
but it has
And
to happen.
that's been an hour. I'm done.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
what?
it's literally also when
Forgot.
people tell me about their dreams,
Whoa.
I hate that.
Okay, because dreams are only interesting
Why
to the person who had them.
Yeah, it's
and
like, what am I
their
gonna do with this information?
mother. Listen,
Nothing.
dreams are only
Stop
interesting
moving, you're
to you
blurry.
and your mother, and that's it.
I move a lot.
And your spiritual.
That might-
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. On the phone, it's good, but I think here because it's bigger, it doesn't look that
Maybe
nice.
just love. That's it.
Does it look good for Jen on the computer?
Jen, does it look good?
Jan, message me how the camera quality
You're
is.
one auntie that.
Ew, exactly. It's the hard part.
We were talking about AMSR today.
Yeah,
Everyone
everyone
has
has
like,
ASMR.
everyone has this really business, auntie. I don't mean like a business. Like village auntie was like, yes, the way to heal this is drink this egg yolk with honey and go back. And that will get rid of your knee.
Guys,
She'll
it's
probably be
7
right.
o'clock. It's 7 o'clock.
Oh, it's 7 o'clock. Okay. Wait.
Okay, let us know. Give me the signal when you're going live.
Yeah.
We need.
Olivia.
Okay.
Are you living your TV dreams right now?
Oh, I think I'm.
Hey, Spark team, we're streaming live from campus, and today we have Olivia with us for our Sexuality and Disability seminar. So Olivia joins us from Planned Parenthood Ottawa, and she's currently finishing her Master's of Social Work, going into her last year. So she's going to be joining us, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat today and keep it pretty informal and talk a little bit about sexuality, relationships, and disabilities. So I thought we would start, Olivia, with discussing why are we even here? Why are we talking about sexuality and relationships, and why is it important to talk about?
Hey y'all, good question. So the work that I've started to do at Planned Parenthood Ottawa actually comes from lack of resources in Ottawa for people with disabilities and sexuality. So after doing a scan of what we have in our Ottawa area, and even in Canada as a whole, there really is a lack of services related to sexual education for people with disabilities. But also kind of what I'm here for today comes from me being an attendant for people with physical disabilities for 6 years and understanding how we can navigate that relationship between client and attendant. And I think a lot of times we don't have those resources or to know exactly what to do.
And I think it's one of those things that we tend to shy away from. But as Olivia and I have had discussions over the last few weeks, kind of preparing for the seminar, is considering sexuality and sex and relationships as another ADL,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, I mean, ADL for some people.
Oh yeah.
It's not,
Activity of daily
not
living.
always daily. But exactly. So if we see sexual health and dating relationships as part of self-care or caring for others, we can see it the same way as toileting, transferring, all these other things that we support our clients in doing every day, and realizing that we already have the skills to actually do these things. It's just reframing it and self-reflecting and looking at maybe our own bias and misconceptions about people with disabilities in their life, but also our own relationship with sexuality, because as a whole, sexuality is pretty taboo to talk about for ourselves, but I think especially for people with disabilities, because that's ignored.
So that being said, what, in your opinion, are some of those common stigma or misconceptions that are out there?
So I think that for people with disabilities, the first and foremost one is that people with disabilities just don't have sex. And the misconception that comes with that is that people with disabilities are asexual. While it's true that people with disabilities can be asexual, meaning that not having a sexual attraction to people, most of the time there is, variance in sexual attraction for people with disabilities, and they do want to have sex. So I think when we start the conversation there, it's important because then we can make room for sex education for people with disabilities, because of the concept that well, if we tell them information about how to care for themselves sexually or dating and relationships, then we actually put them at risk for more violence and other things to happen. But research does say that people with disabilities receiving sex education actually makes them more empowered and more informed to make safe decisions.
So talking about it is actually helping to provide a healthy relationship or navigating in the right direction versus causing more harm.
Totally. So I think like if you reflect on it yourself before you knew accurate information about sexuality, you were probably really confused, and like maybe for people who lived in the internet era during that time of their life, Googling things, and we know that those answers aren't always the best. So I think that's also where PPO comes in, because we are doing the education and referrals to really get that out in the open and correct any inaccuracies.
So that being said, how do our beliefs and biases and preconceived notions, like what we bring into a caregiving relationship and our opinions on relationships and sexuality, how does that affect how we address or don't address that topic?
Yeah, so I think that comes to, that awkwardness and feeling really like, oh, I don't really know how to talk to my client about this, and it's really uncomfortable for me, because maybe that topic for yourself is also really uncomfortable, and maybe because it's in a working environment, we don't want to see the people that we work with as sexual beings. But if we are adapting life and social skills and supporting those for our clients, that's also something, sexuality is something that we should be thinking about. So I think that as able-bodied people or people without acquired brain injuries or traumatic brain injury, we rarely think about the preparation, practical life, social skills that we need to lead healthy sexual lives. And so I think that because of our own societal and cultural understandings of sex, and we just ignore that. And I think that's one of the most harmful things that we can do.
And I guess your comfort level with the topic, right? Your comfort level to talk about relationship issues or sex or sexuality is going to factor in if you're kind of picking up on client cues or just kind of letting those questions, go by and not going there.
Yeah, and I think that with any like interpersonal work that we do with people, like whether it be social work or, OT, caregiving, attendant work, we really need to think about what we're bringing to the job. Like, are we bringing openness? Are we checking our bias? Are we checking our own misconceptions and how that's bleeding into our work and how that might be affecting our relationships with our clients? So I think that attendants are so creative and that we do so many things already, or anyone who's in a caregiving profession, that it would be natural to go one step further and actually go into this kind of like taboo unknown. And with that, there's so many questions surrounding like, well, how do I even start that conversation? And it can be really difficult, but I mean, it's awesome that people are interested and hearing something about this because it's so important.
And I think just taking a minute to kind of self-reflect and check in with each and every one of ourselves and be like, okay, what is my opinion on sexuality? What is my opinion on relationships for my clients? What is my comfort level? Because taking the time to reflect is going to help us be aware of what we're actually bringing into the client's homes in terms of our preconceived notions.
Right. And so when we have our own bias and misconceptions, sometimes we're also missing certain questions that we should be asking, or, reading in between the lines of what our clients are saying to us. And I think also too, it can be harmful because of our opinions and other factors that come into our work can also be a burden on people with disabilities. So if we as attendants and caregivers can make it more easy or easily accessible for for our clients, then we should, because that would be one less barrier for them to face.
Yeah. So challenge to everyone watching and everyone that's going to be watching is to think about this topic a little bit more. Think about your own bias and preconceived notions and beliefs about the topic, and just keep that in the back of your mind when you are working with clients and this topic is coming up. So we put out a questionnaire and we asked people, what are some of the things that people have asked or said? In your opinion, what are some of the hidden cues for help that someone wants to talk about relationships or sexuality?
Right. Yeah, thanks everyone so much if you're watching and you handed in any sort of real life experience or questions. That is super helpful, and it's definitely the time for us to talk about it, and I really appreciate it. Some of you did write in with some scenarios that you have noticed. So if you're watching TV with a client and they're talking about how they'll never have a relationship like the ones they see on TV, I think if we take that example, that would be a time where you could dive into that and talk about it, because I think media in general does have very glamorized concepts of relationships that for typical people, it is even like astronomically like unachievable. So kind of breaking it down, like, well, what about that relationship do you like? Or when you see that, how does it make you feel? And I think that to have those conversations, it's also blending a lot of our own communication and interpersonal skills. And like you said, like being open to this conversation happening. So sometimes it can be a passing comment like that. I don't know if necessarily you could be like, oh, they're crying for help. But like, I think that reading in between the lines can be really helpful, and thinking about and the self-reflection piece of what we're bringing to our work.
I find from my experience working with clients in the field, it's those kind of hidden or indirect comments that are the easiest to just ignore, and not actually delve in and address, right? And I guilty of doing that to clients, you know what I mean? Not feeling super comfortable with the topic or what to say or how to approach it. It's easier just to let those kind of roll off and redirect and say, okay, so we were working on this, right? Versus actually delving into the conversation, right, which is probably what they wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes the way systems are set up and what is so different with SparkU is that we often don't have a community and a culture where attendants can speak to each other about these things, but also realizing like burnout is real. So sometimes we ignore those questions because they'll lead to more things that we need to do as attendants. And while that is real, I think that we should challenge ourselves not to use that as an excuse to not give appropriate services to our clients. And, personally as an attendant, like I can relate to you saying that. I think that it's like, well, we were only given a 30-minute window and we don't really have time to touch on this today. But what happens when we keep letting it roll and roll and roll? It shows and says without like non-verbally that we don't take sexuality seriously as any other type of activity in life.
Do you think it's easy as a means to kind of justify not addressing those comments is that that's not my job? You know what I mean? Like that's not my role. And whose role is it?
I think that's the question, right? It's like, if it's not the OT's job, then the OT will say it's the social worker's job. And if it's not the social worker's job, then it's the partner's job. And the partner is really exhausted. So they'll be like, hey, is it the caregiver's job? And then it just gets lost in a cycle. Yeah. And then it ends up that the client has no means, no referrals for any sort of like adaptation or access to information about sexuality.
Because nobody's really taking it.
Yeah.
And owning like that they're going to take it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we had a few caregivers that were like, no, I want to know what I should be doing or how I should be responding. And others that were looking for some strategies on like, what are the do nots? So let's start with the do's. Like what should we be doing when it comes to this topic?
Okay. So I brought 3 do's and do nots. So I'll start with the do's, like you said. So The first one that I thought of was ask more open-ended questions once something is said. So I think a lot of times that we ask questions that are yes or no answered. So for example, you could say when you say you feel you will never have what your sister and her boyfriend has, what do you mean by that? And so that is not something that's answered with a yes or no. It prompts your client to really think about what is it about that relationship or my fixation on that relationship that I do want for myself. And I think that allows you to explore that together rather than yes or no answers.
And then move on.
Yeah.
Right. It's easy,
Yeah.
like yes, no, okay, moving on.
Right. Yeah. And I think that when we don't allow our clients to elaborate, that's almost like the same as ignoring it. Yeah. So for the second one is if you're uncomfortable with a client's questions, practice different ways to answer them because they'll always come up. So a lot of you said that you're uncomfortable with the questions, and that is totally, I mean, take time to realize that those questions are making you feel uncomfortable, and that's totally normal. I think when we're probed about our own sexuality, a lot of cultural understandings have told us that we shouldn't be talking about our own like relationships or sexuality, and we don't go there. So if a client's asking you, for example, if you're married and that makes you feel uncomfortable, you could even just deflect that question and say, you've been talking a lot about marriage lately. Is there something on your mind? And then they might say, yeah, I've been thinking about getting married and if that will happen for me. And then you can have a conversation that way. Or, I mean, me personally in my practice, I don't have a problem letting my clients know like certain things about my life. I think it can actually build rapport and like very healthy relationships, and that a certain amount of self-disclosure can be healthy if it is important to that moment and also helpful. Yeah. So I think those are the two things that we need to think about in terms of self-disclosure. Yeah. Are they important and helpful in the moment?
And are you doing it for yourself, or are you doing it for the client, right? Mm-hmm. And still creating those boundaries on what we share and what we don't share. But I agree that, you know, there's certain aspects that I feel comfortable sharing if people were to ask me a question, and everyone has a different level of how much they're willing to share. But I think you bring up a good point that, you know, why are we sharing? You know, is it to make us feel better, or is it to help the client relate and understand the concept?
Right, exactly. And I think that it's important to remember that we know so many intimate things about our clients that I think in some way they do deserve to know a little about us. Mm-hmm. And I know that it can be very complicated, but I think that's the humanness of the work. Yeah. Like we know very intimate things, like if it comes to like toileting and transfer and the actual care, that if we kind of weigh those things, like telling someone that you're married or in a relationship, maybe that's something that you could feel comfortable with if you think about that sort of trade-off.
The intimate nature of just going into someone's home. Yeah. I never thought of it. People always ask me like, oh, what's it like going into people's homes? I was like, oh, it's fine. Like, it's no big deal. You know what I mean? Until one day someone was like, well, how does the client feel about having a stranger come into their home? And I was like, oh my God, I never thought of it that way. Like, you know, I was so focused on what it was like for me, I wasn't thinking about what it was like for them.
Right. There's a lot of invasive things that happen in a person with a disability's life that we often normalize in these fields and can be normalized for people with disabilities. So I think like bringing back that intimate nature and the humanness, like I said, is important. And I think your practice will be better for it too. So the last do, number 3, although there's like many do's that you can do, be open to trying and learning something new with or for your clients. So staying informed about various disability media or attendant trainings, like even listening to this might also help, maybe, I don't know. But for me, like I also stay informed with certain podcasts or movies or what's in the news related to disability so that I can know what's affecting my clients or affecting the people that I'm working with. That can also help me start a conversation with my clients as well. And, having a desire to learn more about creative and adaptive ways to support healthy relationships and sexuality. Like I said, I think people in the caregiving field are really creative. Like OT, whole job is to be super creative with making things work. So why not try to make certain things more adaptive for daily living activity? Yeah. And also remember that you can't fix everything. I think that's one of the biggest things is that people who are in helping professions or work in like human services often think that they're going to go above and beyond and fix everything, but there is a certain part of a client's life that we can't always fix, but we can do our job by doing what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are 3 great do's. What about the don'ts?
The don'ts. Okay, so we already kind of talked about this, but number 1 is shut them down or ignore them. So be ready to explore the topic. It might feel uncomfortable at the time, but your relationship will be better for it. Even if you don't know exactly what to say, it's okay not to have the answers. And even actively listening and paying attention really does just help the person feel heard, and sometimes that's the best thing.
It's probably not comfortable for them either to be bringing it up. That, like, everyone's different in terms of how open they are, but this could be something that they're really uncomfortable, but is really an issue that they're trying to bring up.
Right, and they may be facing some pretty severe barriers, maybe after an injury or just in everyday life, that it has taken them a lot to bring that up. And I think like recognizing that courage and bravery without like verging on like, oh, you're so inspirational for letting me know. Validate them or be like, thanks for trusting me to have this conversation with you. And I hear you, that must be incredibly difficult. I think sometimes like empathetic responses can be the best. Yeah. So number 2 is don't tell a lie. I think sometimes people will just say whatever to like get the conversation out of the way. But like I said, if you don't know the answer, tell the client you're not sure, but that you're listening and that you can figure out the answer together. Don't lie because it's easier for you to handle. That just causes more confusion, and you might also be giving misinformation that could put them at risk. So like if you were talking about like condom use or not like having that conversation with the client or the client's family, I think the client's family is also something that we talked about a lot. So when we are navigating this space, if it's necessary, are we talking to the family or their partner about what is the best way to handle this situation? But when it comes to lying, if you're not comfortable, perhaps you could refer to someone else.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point with being a caregiver or a professional in there, is you're not alone, right? As if you're in there as an attending caregiver, and this topic comes up, there's often a team surrounding this, that we're not having to navigate this whole topic by ourselves. We can rope in the team and help actually be an advocate for the client that this is a goal that they want to work towards.
Totally, yeah. So sometimes if we just see it as like a goal, like to normalize this, if it feels like something abnormal to you, is to see it as a goal that we need to reach, and that it means adaptation or certain life and social skills. I think that's one of the best ways to start looking at it, by using the skills that we already have. And for the 3rd don't, I put don't perpetuate ableism. So ableism is the oppression and everyday oppression against people with disabilities. So don't tell your client that they'll never have sex or have sex again, because it's simply not true. A lot of people with disabilities do have sex, and they eventually go to have healthy sexual lives after an injury. Validating internalized stigma after an accident for people with acquired disabilities, and acknowledging that it's there and that it is a journey is also very important. But not focusing so much on the negative aspects or making someone feel like a burden. Focusing on what you can do and what is possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are my do's and don'ts.
Thank you. So we talked a little bit about the hidden cues and some of those comments that clients might make that make you think that they might want to talk further. What can we do if clients are misinterpreting cues or actions? So for example, she held the door open for me, she must like me.
Yeah, so I like to flip these sort of situations and think maybe this means that this is a good time to be talking about healthy relationships and dating and sexuality and all that good stuff. So understanding the situation as a time to start exploring different life and social skills. Like, I think that a lot of caregivers, depending on your client, you already are implementing or doing a plan to implement life and social skills. So that's just one of them. I think healthy relationships and dating is one of them as well. So I think that with the door opening situation, being direct with your communication is a great first step. I think sometimes we shy away from directness. And actually, for some of our clients, being direct with our communication can be the most helpful rather than abstract or, avoidant. So if the door opening, holding situation thing is happening, I was thinking of saying, I know it was really nice of them to open the door, but 99% of the time, it means that they were being polite and helping others. And then you can reflect and say, when you open the door, are you always interested in the person that you hold it open for? So I think that makes the communication personal, but it also is direct and can be appreciated. Because if it's something that does make you uncomfortable as a caregiver, then, approaching it and, communicating that with our client should be the first step.
Yeah, because I see that example as another one of those things that's really easy to just ignore.
Right.
Like not get into it, not delve into that comment or even address it directly, but just kind of like, okay, get into the store and let's do what we need to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had my own my own experiences with clients. So working with men with severe mental health disabilities, like sitting too close to young women on the bus or staring too hard at young women in public. It was a good time for me to have that conversation with them about, some people on the bus don't want to be sat that close to you. Actually, most people do not want to sit that close to you on the bus. And most people on the bus are just on their way to get to somewhere and would rather be left alone. And then also talking about certain situations directly really helped and improved that client's experience in public.
So we have a question that's come up relevant to kind of what we're talking about. So, let Zach jump in here and let's hear the question.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. The question from an audience member is, when a client is dealing with some physical and mental health issues and is exploring dating online, what are some things that we can do as a caregiver to help support them and ensure they're not being taken advantage of?
Okay, so to kind of summarize that, we're looking at the questions about a client with physical and mental health issues that is exploring online dating and how we as a caregiver can kind of support and help them in that aspect.
So online dating and online safety is a huge hot topic for people with disabilities. That's often the number one question that they are asking to educators right now is, where do I meet people online? How do I communicate or disclose my disability to people online? So I think for every client, it's very specific what exactly they need support with. But if maybe it's communication skills, or maybe it's self-protection skills or refusal skills, having a conversation about what you don't share online if they don't know. So SIN numbers, maybe your home address, within a certain amount of time. And if self-disclosure is a thing, a lot of folks with physical disabilities often like to put a little like wheelchair emoji symbol in their profile that lets people know that I'm in a wheelchair, or having a picture of themselves in a wheelchair. And I think that can be a scary thing because there are a lot of people online who will target people with physical disabilities for reasons that aren't just about liking the person themselves. But I think that those are the things very broadly I could think of.
So looking at, what are the potential safety issues with that particular client? Because every client's going to be different. Is it, like you said, is it oversharing? Is it, there's so many things. So as a caregiver, looking at like, what are the concerns? Like what does your gut tell you are the safety issues here? And then doing some work around, okay, these are topics that we should be talking about. These are what we shouldn't be, and actually creating concrete lists and making them probably specific. I know in my experience with brain injury, the generalization isn't always there. So don't share personal information. Say, don't share your date of birth, your credit card information. Like,
be specific. Yes. Yeah. So like SIN number, date of birth, credit card information. Like I said, where you live, maybe up to a certain point. Like, talk about meeting in public places for the first time. But also keep in mind for yourself too, like if this person doesn't necessarily always need like a chaperone or a caregiver with them, be sure not to, smother them too much, because they are someone who should be able to go out with themselves and another partner and explore that part of their lives like all of us.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
So how can we help with questions or issues related to self-image, self-esteem, self-worth, and confidence? That was something that came up a lot with the survey that we sent out. We had a lot of people respond back of clients talking about like, they're not worth it, like they don't have the self-worth, they don't have the confidence, the self-esteem, like I don't deserve a relationship. Like, how do you handle those kind of?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a common experience for all of us to have those self-esteem, self-worth sort of doubts about ourselves. But I think for people with disabilities, there's also, like I said before, the internalized ableism. Like a lot of those, like, I'm not good enough, no one will ever love me, like how could someone date me when I have a disability? Those are internalized ableist thoughts. And I think you could also break those down with your client too and be like, just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you'll never have a relationship. Something as direct as that too. But when it comes to helping your client build self-esteem and self-worth, I think having a conversation about what makes them feel good, like maybe prior to an accident, if they have an injury, were they doing something like a sport that helped them feel good about themselves? Is there a way to adapt that sport? Is there a specific way of dressing that makes them feel better? Is there a specific hobby that they could go and have like social time with and meet new people that they feel that they're good at? So I think like as a caregiver, you can help them plan those things as well, or help them out with figuring out what would make them feel good. And I think for a lot of people with disabilities, especially developmental and intellectual disabilities, there's not very many opportunities for socialization with their peers. So I think sometimes, going out with people who are like in your same age group or have a shared lived experience can really boost your self-esteem by building those healthy relationships. And even if they're not in a romantic way, they can be really positive.
I think I love how you talk about like those simple things. I know we've had clients in the past where, the caregiver goes in and it's as simple as, they help them wash and blow dry their hair and style it, or put their makeup on, or took them to the store to buy the makeup, or did their nails, right? Those, I know those are all kind of similar, but it's the idea of something small that can make somebody feel good.
Right. Like, I think that's a great idea too, because that's like the self-care piece and the pampering piece, because we do a lot of things that are very much like helping with things that help our clients get through day to day. But we also forget, like, what if we like weren't able to cut our nails or do our hair in a certain way or dye our hair without the assistance of someone else? These are some things that I think that we need to think about making time for with our clients if they're interested in it.
Yeah. I think it goes back to that empathy piece that you talked about, is, putting yourself in your client's shoes in this respect, right? Like, they're saying to you, no, I'm not going out. Like, look what I look like. You know what I mean? And I've had clients say that, like, I'm not going out in public. Like, I haven't washed my hair in 3 days.
Right.
Right. And it's easy for us to be like, come on, like, let's just go. But really, would I want to go in public and wash my hair in 3 days?
Exactly. So I think just bringing back the care, like bringing back care to care, if that makes sense. Like, I think that a lot of the times it can be really like just robotic, and that we forget that, like I said, there's a lot of intimacy in this care. Although it's platonic intimacy, being that close to a person and helping them with these very personal things is intimate.
Yeah, absolutely. So for clients, a lot of the clients we work with have acquired disabilities. So for example, brain injury. They were, 17, 25, 35, 45 when these injuries took place. And they start experiencing and voicing issues around intimacy or feeling like a burden for their loved one or partner. How can we respond with those comments, and how can these clients, redevelop intimacy? I know in my work with clients, this was something I saw a lot, was this role shift, whether it's male or female that got in the accident. Is their partner, like their role changed. They became a caregiver. And so now they weren't a wife or a spouse or a husband. Now they were the caregiver. And so that changed the whole intimacy of the relationship.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't have that much experience working with people with ABI or traumatic brain injuries. So you actually gave me a lot of information in terms of how that works practically. But if I reflect on what I know from research and what I've actually seen, is that it's often making time for that grieving process, because oftentimes with acquired injury, it's a loss. It's almost as if someone has died. Their idea of themselves prior to injury is really what is being grieved. So I think allowing, familiarizing yourself with the grief cycle and knowing and adapting to that and validating that, I can imagine that could be really hard, because you were being able to mow the lawn and grill on the barbecue, and as a man, that's what you feel like masculine activities are in your household. And I mean, you could break that down however you want, as what is femininity, what is masculinity. But at the end of the day, those are things that people ascribe to that does make their life, it makes sense of their life. And, ABI can change intimacy, sexuality, different preferences. It can really turn your life upside down. So with sexuality, clients may notice that their desire has changed, libido is different. And I think if we're going to address intimacy and sexuality with ABI clients, like anything else, just really getting down to what the specific issue is, if you can have that conversation. So for a lot of women with ABI, there are changes in lubrication and changes in menstruation because of changes in the brain. So if you know that specifically about your client, then you can start to look at referrals or different ways to, assist with those areas of the client with ABI.
Yeah, just understanding how an acquired brain injury can affect sexual health.
Yeah, I mean, if you have lack of energy, lack of desire, you don't feel good about your body, you're also feeling, emotionally and intellectually different sometimes. It can be difficult, and it can really change the relationships in your life.
Yeah, there's there's a lot going on, right? In my experience, and one thing that came up a lot, I found clients, is the partner not really understanding the disability and what it means and why they're feeling the way they are, acting the way they are, and why all of a sudden they've lost interest or that they're so tired, right? And I know providing education to help everybody kind of understand the disability can be helpful.
And that's why I also think, I mean, with my project, is that it's not just about sex education for people with disabilities. I think that there needs to be like a wraparound network of care and support so that every person who is a caring person or a relative or a friend in their life is informed of what this might look like, and to help and support the capacity of the person now. And I think a lot of the times it's just that, you know, a lot of people affected don't have that information. So I think as a caregiver, looking towards really making sure that everyone is on the same page is super important. And also that could be done, you know, if you notice something about like the client and their partner, you could even talk about, you know, couples counseling is there a referral for that, because you have to realize too what your capacity as a professional is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that we have to be careful as caregivers in terms of our recommendation and who else is in the team. You know what I mean? Do they have a team? Do they just have a family member? If they do have a family member, should this be something we're talking about maybe with our care partner or the family? If this is a team, should we be bringing this up to the team? Because often we're the ones that are in there developing the most intimate relationships, and clients are opening up to us, right? So considering, you know, what's the best avenue to help support this client? We don't have to do it all on our own. There's a lot of support out there. So I saw that there's another question that's come in, so I'm going to throw it over to Zach.
Yeah, we got lots of questions coming in.
Oh, cool.
This one is particularly relevant to what we're at right now. So the question is, Olivia, if you know of any specific events and or community groups in the city of Ottawa which offers representation of people with disabilities embracing their sexuality?
It's a good question. So I find that in Ottawa there really is not very many that I do know. So like there's quite a bit in Toronto. So if you think about like disabled people are sexy is also a movement that has happened where people with disabilities are embracing their sexual lives. There's a lot of things that actually are happening online. So if your client is someone who is online a lot, like I said, Andrew Gerza, I think, is a great resource for that. He has a podcast. He's a gay man who has cerebral palsy. He talks about how we should change our perspectives on people with disabilities being sexy and, you know, feeling good. When it comes to Ottawa, I'm really disappointed. And I hope that will change. I know that in certain organizations, they do this very, like, not formally.
Okay.
So, like, if you ask, you might be able to find, you know, certain resources.
Yeah.
But I find that they're not quite good.
Okay.
But
lots of work to be done.
There's lots of work to be done. I think online really is like just like popping with so many different things. And also in Toronto, if you want to look it up, the Rose Project is something I would recommend as well. In Toronto as well.
So Toronto, you know, it's gonna migrate. It's gonna
We're
come
trying.
to Ottawa.
This is exactly what our project is like at PPO, just to try to get that moving forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Olivia is going to put together some resources, and we're going to be throwing that out into the SparkU channel as well.
Yes.
And you know, we're going to answer some more questions. But if you think of other questions or you want to pick her brain, she's more than happy to help us kind of navigate these situations. So Zach, do we have another question?
Yeah, I've got a couple lined up.
Sweet.
Cool.
This is a question that seems like a scenario one.
Okay.
Question is, what could someone do when an individual who's struggling with some mental health issues talks a lot about sex, but they're unable to make healthy decisions regarding dating and or sexual partners?
Okay, so the question is, somebody who has mental health issues, who talks a lot about sex, but isn't able to make healthy choices and decisions when it comes to dating and partners.
It's a good question. So I think there's a lot of layers to that question. I think first is, how are we defining healthy choices? So are they healthy choices for you, or will they be healthy choices for the client? So sometimes we think that, and this is totally just like self-reflective. I don't mean it to be in any sort of way, but I've had to do a lot of unpacking myself at Planned Parenthood Ottawa about these things. So we sometimes have our own bias about what are informed and healthy choices. Is it something that you wouldn't do, or do you know as like based on evidence that it isn't healthy? And I think that it's one of those things where if we look at what does research say and what is evidence-based in terms of like our own education programs, we do go over safer sex, different contraception options, and that might be something that you could talk with your client about. Do you think I'm missing anything?
I think so. The education
Yeah.
the mental health might play a factor in terms of how much they're remembering and taking in.
Mhm.
But I think you bring up an excellent point going back to that bias of like, do we think it's unsafe? If our best friend was doing this, would we be giving them a hard time? Like really checking how we're perceiving the information.
Yeah, and it's like, is it because it's multiple partners or many partners at once? Because those can also be value-based judgments that we're not necessarily always thinking about. So I think to protect and to inform your client is with information. So information about STIs and protection and contraception would be a good start, I would think.
Yeah. And can they get that through Planned Parenthood?
Yes, you can. You can find it on our website, but you're also welcome to come into our office if you are local, or call in anytime. Call or email with any questions that you do have, and we try to assist you the best that we can.
Awesome. Okay,
Nice
Zach.
plug.
Perfect. So a question that we've had actually revolved about some of Olivia, some of your don't do's. One thing that you had mentioned that our audience really received well was about not lying. This commenter mentioned that it's something they very strongly agree with. But on that note, what do you recommend as an approach when a client expresses a view that you do not agree with or conflicts with your personal views? Do you try to change their mind? Do we stay silent, or do we work on providing a safe space and just letting them talk?
It's a good question. I think that even goes beyond like personal attendant caregiving. Like when you're working with other people and it's an interpersonal relationship, I think any person we actually encounter, this can be really conflicting. The way that I personally approach it is what they're saying harmful to themselves and other people? Is it immediately harmful, or is it something that can be talked about so that you can unpack that? I think when I'm working as a caregiver, if they're saying something that is opinion-based that I don't agree with, like whether, there's always certain contexts around like religion or sexuality or whatever it may be, if it isn't inciting any direct violence or hurt towards anyone, I try to take it as a very impersonal thing towards myself, because like any working situation, you might want to just keep those things separate. But if you feel like it is something that could potentially be harmful, it is good to talk about that. And talk about it in a way that is relatable to them in their lives that they can use.
Or if it's, I think another factor is it impacting care, right? I know this is kind of similar, but not exactly the same, is I've worked with families before, and the way they parent that family parents their children is, you know, the opposite of what the caregiver would do or what I would do. And, you know, we can have very strong opinions, but it doesn't mean we can go in there and give our parenting advice and say what you're doing is wrong. You know, there's a lot of context in terms of when we can actually insert our opinions and when we have to keep our mouths closed, because it doesn't matter what we think or that we disagree with it. This is the client expressing themselves and the client's opinion. We don't have to get into a back and forth argument on it.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I would say to that, I think this might be the most important thing that I was forgetting, but if it's something that is personally affecting you and you feel like it's related to your identity and you feel unsafe working with that person, you're protected just the same as any other worker under laws and rights. And you should not be subjected to discrimination because, you know, your self-care and your importance is just as worthy. So I would say if it's affecting you, then that's something that you need to, you know, work out for yourself.
Yeah, that's something you need to really reflect on. Are you taking this personally? Is it a personal attack? Is it interfering with your ability to work with them and feel safe and comfortable?
Yeah. Well, if your client does have negative opinions about being queer and you are queer, that could make you feel unsafe. So I think really thinking about that and your own safety is important. Look out for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Zach, do we have any more questions?
I have one more lined up.
Okay.
This caregiver wanted to note that they work with people of all ages.
Okay.
And the question is, when we have these conversations with clients, is it recommended we use real terms or should we stick to nicknames? How do you define what's age appropriate?
Okay, so age appropriateness is something that is talked about quite a bit. The number one thing that we talk about at Planned Parenthood Ottawa is to never lie, which is one of my don'ts. But to also use correct terminology. So at any age range, it would be appropriate to use terms like penis and vagina and vulva. And why I personally would recommend that as well, based on my research, is that when we do use other terms for like genitals or any other body part, it can be confusing to children. And it could also put them at risk. So if we're using different words for different genitalia and something does happen that does harm or put the child at risk for violence, it can be very confusing for them. So in terms of age appropriateness, I mean, I would say at any age, using penis and vagina, vulva, testicles, these are all things at Planned Parenthood Ottawa that we do recommend. If you do want more information about that, we do do education from, I think, grades 4 to 9 and then 9 to 12. So we do have different developmentally appropriate information on that.
So is that all our questions that we got?
We have one comment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Someone just wanted to mention that they were especially appreciative of Olivia coming in. They find her answers and commentary extremely helpful and your perspectives really valuable, and how they appreciate you dedicating your life and career to such an important topic that a lot of health professionals tend to shy away from. So thank you.
Thank you. That's so nice.
And to piggyback off of the anonymous comment, thank you, is at Spark, we want to thank you for coming in and taking the time to really delve into this topic, something that tends to be shied away from. We're hoping here at Spark, you know, we're always thinking outside the box. We're always trying to challenge the status quo. Is let's make this something that we're not shying away from, right? That we're not afraid to tackle sexuality and relationships head on, and that we have supportive partners in the community like Planned Parenthood Ottawa that are helping us tackle these issues. We're not alone. We can reach out to each other. We can reach out to Olivia. We can reach out to our community partners to make sure that our clients' relationships and sexuality isn't being ignored. So thank you from us here. Thank you. That's all for us here at campus. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any other further questions or anything comes up, please don't hesitate to send those my way, either via direct message or on the SparkU channel. We are going to be posting the recording so you guys can look back and relive the amazing hour that we just had.
So lucky.
And Olivia will be sending out some resources as well for you guys to check out. But again, thank you all, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, y'all.